Morning, everybody. My name's Jess Pearson, and I'm the Consultant Psychologist at PPS. Every Tuesday morning at 9:15, I am putting up a new video to essentially target mental health and dealing with challenges that might present themselves as we're all in self-isolation over this next little while. So what I would say is, as I've gone live, if you can see the comments section below this video, if you have any questions at all that occur to you as I'm running through today, please feel free to comment there and I will see them pop up and address them as they come in. The first video that I did essentially covered dealing with worry and anxiety during this period of self-isolation. And the one last week targeted looking at ways to effectively work from home. So what I would say is, if you're interested in either of those topics, head onto our business page and you'll be able to find the videos there. We've also popped them up on YouTube so that you can go back to them and find any tips that have been helpful to return to. So in terms of today's topic, I'm actually going to be looking at ways to be self-compassionate during this time of self-isolation. So I figured that this was a topic worth discussing. I think a lot of people have lost a bit of touch with self-compassion during this time, and there is often a lot of self-criticism about things that we're not doing as well as we would like to. Good morning, Mish. Good morning, Leanne. Thanks for popping in. So that's the topic for today. Like I said, if you have any questions, just pop them into the chat, and I'll address them as I go. So, in terms of self-compassion, what is self-compassion? I thought this would be a good place to start. There's been an increasing sort of body of research evidence that has targeted this, and there are significant benefits, as we've learnt, for mental health. So the definition that I like of self-compassion actually comes from Dr. Kristen Neff, who is an associate professor of educational psychology at the University of Texas at Austin in the US. And she says self-compassion is essentially extending kindness and compassion towards oneself in instances of perceived inadequacy, failure, or general suffering. So it involves, acting the same way towards yourself as you would a loved one in a challenging situation. And, a loved one who might be having a difficult time. So instead of ignoring your pain with a sort of stiff upper lip approach, you can tell yourself, this is a really difficult time right now, and ask yourself, how can I comfort and care for myself in this moment? So a lot of people, when they hear the word self-compassion, they think, is this being, am I showing myself self-pity, for example? And self-compassion is not self-pity. It's not pitying yourself during this time. It's saying, actually, I'm acknowledging that this is really tough, and in the way that I would another person that I love. It's also not being self-indulgent. It's not sort of saying, I'm going to give myself all of this attention and ignore everything else that's going on. That can also be a common misconception for self-compassion, but it's neither of those things. Self-compassion is essentially identifying the way you would respond to somebody that you love and seeing if you can direct that towards yourself. And we sometimes notice that there's a real difference in the way that we might respond to a loved one compared with the way that we're talking to ourselves. So I'm going to jump through a few of the elements of self-compassion. Good morning, Jess. Good morning, Gail. Good to see you. And essentially, self-compassion involves 3 key elements. So I'm going to name them, and then I'm going to go through them and sort of discuss how you might be able to implement them during this time, as we're all self-isolating and all trying to navigate this together. So the 3 elements of self-compassion are, first of all, self-kindness, second of all, mindfulness, and third of all, what we call common humanity. So I'm going to go through, as I said, each of those and describe what they are and what they're not, as well as ways to implement them during this time. So self-kindness, let's start with that. And it's self-kindness rather than self-judgment. So what this means is essentially targeting warmth and showing understanding towards ourselves when we suffer, rather than ignoring our pain and being self-critical. So we know that this is a really tough time at the moment, and it might be really tempting to criticize ourselves during this time for how we're handling the COVID-19 situation individually. So you might be saying to yourself, I'm not teaching my children well enough while I'm at home. I'm not eating healthily enough. I'm not exercising enough. I'm not achieving as much as I normally would at work. And you can hear in each of those statements there is a bit of self-judgment. There is, it's essentially you saying, I'm not good enough in all of these respects, and really focusing on what you're not rather than what you're doing. And I guess one way to come at the self-kindness here is to ask yourself, what would I say to a friend, or what would I say to a loved one in this situation and during this time? And is that different to what I am saying to myself right now? So can you imagine yourself saying, you're not eating healthily enough, you're not teaching your children well enough? And if the answer is no, then see if you can change that dialogue and see if you can then direct it towards yourself. So if you have identified that you might say to a friend, look, you are doing the best you can with the current circumstances. You are continuing to work from home, or you've lost your job, but you're going for the job seeker allowance. Yes, your kids are at home and you're trying to do the best job you can with them, but it's not your job to be their teacher. It's actually okay to not be eating perfectly during this time, and it's okay to not be sort of in the routine exercise-wise that you would be normally. And see how it feels, like I said, to direct that towards yourself. So notice that talk that you would use with somebody that you love and direct it back to you. That's what self-kindness is. And notice as well when that self-judgment pops up, and see how it's affecting your mood. One of the benefits of self-kindness is that the more we're able to engage with it, the more we notice the impacts on our mood. And there's excellent research evidence behind this. If we are able to extend that kind approach, we're going to be in a better position to be able to do what we do best. And in the same way that you might sit down with a friend and say, it's actually okay, it's okay not to be perfect right now, you're doing that with yourself. And like I said before, self-compassion is not self-pity. It's not pitying yourself. It's also not being self-indulgent. It is simply sitting with yourself and being kind in these really challenging times. The second element of self-compassion is something called mindfulness. And this is a word that's thrown around a lot, particularly recently. It seems to be really having a presence in the online community, but I'm going to explain what it means and in terms of self-compassion. So this is mindfulness versus what we call over-identification with thoughts and feelings. So the human mind has the tendency very naturally to get caught in the past, thinking about things that have happened, or to look forward to things in the future. So you might notice during this time a tendency to be constantly looking back to times, for example, when you've been able to get out with friends, get out with family, duck down to the pub, whatever it is, and really yearning for that time. And what I would say is it is completely natural to be doing that at the moment and to feel distressed that you're not able to right now. But if you're finding yourself always throughout the day returning to, I wish I was back there, I wish I could be doing this right now, what the impact is that it can take you out of the here and now and things that are helpful to you right now. So the same thing can happen in terms of looking forward to the future. And if you look at my video from the first video that I did a couple of weeks ago, I touch on this a little bit. The tendency for our minds to worry about things that might happen in the future. So it is, again, completely natural to notice your mind drifting to, what's going to happen to my friends and family, what's going to happen in terms of logistical things like my groceries, what I'm going to be able to do in the outside world, those types of things. But if, again, you're noticing yourself getting really caught up in those thoughts and really over-identifying with them, it can take you out of the present moment and what is most helpful to you now. So what I would say is mindfulness is being in contact with the present moment, the here and now, acknowledging and with self-kindness any thoughts and negative emotions that are popping up and seeing if you can hold them and hold them in conscious awareness, but without really over-identifying with them. And what that means is you're able to say to yourself, okay, yep, I acknowledge that my mind's getting a bit caught up with the past or a bit caught up with some worries about the future. That's okay. But I'm just going to gently direct myself back to the here and now and say, okay, I'm feeling this right now. That's okay. But what can I be doing for myself right now that is helpful? So you're acknowledging your thoughts and your feelings as they are, but without trying to push them away and also without exaggerating them. And again, there is fantastic research evidence on the impact of mindfulness and how it can help to boost your mental health. So what we know is that avoidance is equally unhelpful. So if you're saying to yourself, I shouldn't be feeling this way, it's not helpful for me to be having these negative emotions, or it's not helpful for me to be doing this. And again, that self-criticism feeds in. Mindfulness allows you to go, yeah, I am actually feeling that way, but I'm going to hold that in conscious awareness and then bring myself back to the present. Alrighty, so the third element of self-compassion is what we call common humanity, and the flip side of common humanity is isolation. And ironically, this is what we're all having to do at the moment. We're having to self-isolate to deal with the situation with COVID-19 and to actually try and protect ourselves and our community, particularly the most vulnerable members of our community and our healthcare teams at the moment as well. We don't want them to be overwhelmed with with too many people all at once, and that's the whole purpose of why we are staying home at the moment. But common humanity is essentially this idea that we are all in this together, and this can be something that is helpful to remember during this time. That yes, we all are in isolation right now, but we're all in isolation together, and we're all sort of commonly affected by this. We know that each person's individual circumstances are different, and people are affected differently in terms of what's happening with their jobs, with their families, those types of things. But the common ground is that we're all having to self-isolate at the moment, and we're doing this to actually protect ourselves, to protect our families, and to protect our communities. So again, if you're able to notice when those moments of isolation pop up, and you might find yourself getting carried away with, I feel really alone in this. And it absolutely can feel that way at the moment because we're all in our own homes right now. But to remind yourself that everybody else is doing this as well, and we're doing this as an act of love, really. We're doing this as a way to better our communities and to protect our communities. So just that slight change in the way you sort of conceptualize this can really be beneficial and really help to influence your mood and what you do during this time. So in summary, self-compassion, remember that it is talking to yourself in the way that you might a loved one. So showing yourself that self-kindness rather than self-judgment. So if you say to yourself, I wouldn't judge a friend if they were going through this, see if you can extend that approach towards yourself. See if you can be kind towards yourself during this time. Mindfulness versus over-identification. So allowing yourself to be in the present moment and to acknowledge any thoughts and feelings that pop up, but without really over-engaging with them or exaggerating them. It also means not ignoring or trying to suppress negative thoughts or emotions, because we know that that's also unhelpful. And our minds have a tendency to want to resolve any things that we try and push out of our minds. So it's a way of resolving it in your head and going, yep, I recognize that is a challenge right now, and that's okay. And in that way, your brain is able to let it go. And finally, common humanity versus isolation. So again, ironically, we are all in self-isolation, but we're in self-isolation together. So being mindful that, and again, there's that mindfulness word, being mindful that this is something that is common among all of us. It is a challenging time, but we are all in this together, and we are doing this for the good of our communities, for our families, for ourselves. So that's the topic for today, everybody, and thank you so much to everybody that has joined. Obviously, you'll be able to view this video after I finish talking as well, and if you have any questions that pop up as you're sort of going about your day and thinking about all of this, then please feel free to comment on the video afterwards as well, or to send us a private message over Facebook, and I will get back to you with that. Look after yourselves this week, and happy Easter, happy belated Easter to everybody, and thank you for tuning in.